Hello, everyone, and welcome to Markings of Remembrance, a virtual conversation with Ronna Ventigan and Kristine Angeles. My name is Bryn Jackson, and I'm an artist and curator and cultural advisor based here in Indianapolis. Over the course of the last 6 months, my collaborator, April Nauber, and I have been working alongside a cohort of peers, engaging each participant's personal history while simultaneously learning about the motifs and patterns found in ancestral body art. Collectively, we have been sharing our findings and personal experiences, continuing a long tradition of cultivating collective memory through oral history. The goal of this workshop has been to create space for remembrance of ancestral tradition and understanding of an art form nearly lost to hundreds of years of religious and political subjugation. This program, including today's conversation and an exhibition opening August 2nd at the Garfield Park Art Center, was made possible with the Power Plant Grant awarded by Big Car Collaborative and funded by the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. Thank you as well to Philip Smith and the Philippine Cultural Community Center for providing the space for us to connect with one another and others within our community. Today, I want to welcome Ronna and Kristine, both of whom are apprentices that I had the pleasure of meeting with when receiving my first ancestral tattoo back in April. Ronna studied at CSU Long Beach for fine arts and worked as a freelance illustrator for television media and digital art. She currently studies under Elle Festin at Spiritual Journey Tattoo and is learning the traditional tattoo arts of the Philippines, including hand poke, tapoke, and hand tapping. Kristine is currently based in Long Beach, California. She was inspired to connect with her roots after a trip to the Philippines. She found Spiritual Journey Tattoo shortly after and began apprenticing under Elle. Under Elle's guidance, she is learning traditional tattooing techniques and working towards reviving and specializing in tattoos from Mindanao. So thank you, Kristine and Ronna, for joining us today for this conversation. Just so everybody knows, we are recording this for folks who aren't able to attend today. So if you don't wish to be seen, please feel free to turn off your cameras. We will be opening up the floor for questions after the conversation. So please feel free to put any questions that you may have in the chat. So I guess we'll go ahead and just get started. Kristine and Ronna, if you would just kind of introduce yourselves and maybe tell us a little bit about your work and sort of how you arrived here.
Do you want to go first, Ronna? You've been there. You've been at Spiritual Journey longer.
Uh, um, I guess my journey started at well, I was interested in Filipino tattoos for a while. I just hadn't had the how you say it? Well, I finally took the time to research it, and I found this book called Kalinga Tattoos by Lars Krutak, and it helped lead me to the shop here in Stanton. And I was first a client at Spiritual Journey Tattoo, and it was like while getting a tattoo during that time, I was looking for a new job, and I just happened to ask um like the L over there if they were accepting apprentices, and they're like, yeah. It was actually a good time. Like they were still looking for someone at the moment, so it was like the right timing to ask, and they immediately hired me to help manage the shop and also be an apprentice. And I've been there since 2022. So it'll be almost over 2 years now at the shop. Currently still learning. Well, I know still actually mastering hand tap. That's actually a harder method to learn. But once I master that and finally can do machine. So almost my progress is slowly happening over there. Right.
Yeah. So I started about a year after Ronna. And it was pretty intimidating because before Ronna, everyone, the like youngest artist, Joseph, had been there for 8 years already. So, and then everyone else has like been there for over a decade. And then it's like Elle and his wife Zell, who are the co-founders and owners of Spiritual Journey. So with me and Ronna, I felt like we were definitely like new to the space, and they were just kind of opening up to other people who hasn't been with the shop and the tribe for so long. And mine honestly was just, I just feel like good timing and luck. I traveled to the Philippines a few months beforehand, and I was like inspired when I saw other Filipina tattooists tattoo, and I was like in a space where I wanted to be more creative. And so I just reached out. I heard a spiritual journey from friends, and it was like half hour away. And I only reached out to two artists, and spiritual journey was one of them. Reached out, got a message back like a few weeks later, showed up and just chatted with Elle for a bit, and he luckily liked me. And I started the next day, and I just have been there every day since. So that was about a year ago now. And yeah, just kind of, it was just a very, very much full immersion experience so far. I think I was a couple months in before I actually got my own tattoo. I came in with almost nothing. And yeah, me and Rona were both tattooed rather quickly when we started at the shop.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the apprenticeship process looks like, and right, what the road to, right, like becoming like a full-fledged tattoo artist, like how does that manifest?
You want to take that, Rona?
Um, I would say so it takes about total about 3 years to complete, and there Elle will first teach you the traditional methods first, and also the patterns that we learned from the Philippines. And it's all through oral tradition. Like he really wants to keep it old school, very traditional. So it's very difficult if you have memory problems. But it's all taught to you there through experience, and it's great to learn there just because they really help you hone the techniques there. Um, yeah, I don't know what else I can say about that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think when I first started, when they said, oh, it's like 2 to 3 years of apprenticeship, like 6 days a week, I was like, what?
Mhm.
And it is very challenging sometimes, but I really see the benefit because everything is passed orally, which is very challenging because it's so much information. And I mean, Bryn, you've talked to Elle, he's just like this wealth of information, and his brain just doesn't stop. And he has like so much information to share. And Joseph, who was the last apprentice before Rona, who'd been there for 8 years already, just has that same wealth of knowledge. It's just like a well of knowledge that it's hard to even have a framework for it because it feels so sporadic. And so we kind of get bits and pieces of information every day we come to the shop, because it's like someone's getting like a different style of tattoo, or we're seeing a pattern we've never seen before. So they're like sharing where that pattern's from, what tribe it's from, like where in the Philippines it's from. So we're like constantly learning on a day-to-day basis and just trying to uh, take it all in. So I do feel like the 3 years of apprenticeship it's it's a long time, but it also feels sometimes like not enough. Like, how am I going to get all this information in that amount of time? So yeah, we're constantly learning, constantly practicing, because I realize it's not just the skills we're developing. It's just like developing an eye for how to render the tattoos, and then also getting ourselves like in the mindset of what these tattoos may have meant for these tribes in the Philippines, which is also really challenging because we grew up in the diaspora. So it's like also trying to reconnect with like a personal reconnection to to Philippines.
Now, you've both mentioned Elle and the tribe as well. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, right, sort of about Elle, how the tribe started, and really how he came to be this sort of like this well of knowledge, right? Like, how is it that the folks behind the studio have been able to compile as much information as they have, given the relative scarcity?
Mm. Um, I I feel like the first word that comes to mind is obsession. I was just like upset. Like I think so. The tribe was started like 28 years ago, and that was just it's kind of I think his curiosity for Filipino tribal was the same curiosity that I think is happening with a lot of people in the diaspora right now, where it's like, oh, Filipinos have tattoos. Like, what does that look like? Like, what are the motifs? Like, it's the same curiosity that I think is happening in a bigger scale right now. Um, and that's how it started. I think, but he was really, it sounded like from what he's shared with us, he was very much encouraged to do a deep dive on his own. Because he was mentored by, do you remember their names?
Isaiah.
Ronna, his mentors? Isaiah?
One is Isaiah.
Yeah, Isaiah in Hawaii, and they do Hawaiian and Polynesian tattoos. And he wanted to get like a Hawaiian Polynesian tattoo, and they told him no. They're like, the Philippines has their own tattoos, and he was like, what? And they're like, you do your own research. So he did a deep dive, and I think from there just spun into a bigger thing of what it is today. And he just started researching and like he would always share stories like he was like back in my day he's not even like that old, but he's like back in my day I'd have to go to the library, I would scan like text, and I'd spend like hundreds of dollars on like rare books, and like he would seek information and buy books, and he would be like looking through a whole book, and there'd only be like one sentence in a whole book that would relate to tattoos. But he would like get that book, and then he would just start stitching things together. And he always talks about like the revival kind of it's like building a house, and he's just kind of you're just putting in the groundwork, and you're doing it brick by brick and just piecing things together. And I think he's been doing that for the last 28 years and have actually found a community of people who are also interested in this work. And so I feel like this community of people have come together and worked together to pull their resources. Like Lars Krutak, for example, is a good friend of Elle's, and Elle has told me that Lars would often send him articles, books, things that he could like look into and research. And since Lars is like an anthropologist, he has access to a lot of these. So I think also that Elle was able to develop relationships with people who had the same interest and curiosity and passion for it has allowed him to gain like access to all of this information as well. But I think one of the big things too is obsession. Like he puts in hours and like reading. If he has a curiosity, he'll spend hours like trying to find an answer or trying to make sense of it. And I think like me and Ronna get to reap the benefits of just being in that orb.
Um, yeah, I guess how has how has the tribe like actually sourced some of these patterns? I mean, I know that they're going back to, right, like when I received my chart, right, because Spiritual Journey will generate a chart for those who are willing to, do the research and send them the information. Right, like where are some of those patterns coming from? And um, yeah, again, sort of like how are they sourced given like the relative like scarcity of documentation? I mean, I know that there are a lot of photographs of Filipino indigenous peoples, around like the early 20th century. But I mean, at that time, the art form was kind of already um, kind of dying at the time. And so how have how has the imagery, right, like kind of come back to us?
Definitely
You want
from
to share, Ronna?
L's, yeah, it's definitely from like L's 20 plus years of research. Um, Again, he's just really obsessed with it. If you, um, and also like just resources from Lars alone, like help from that. He's gone through so many articles, books. He has like old books from, I guess, hundreds of years ago that he keeps. But this is all compiled from L himself and the help of Lars and other archaeologists as well. Um, I know he does a lot of thinking around these. Like he not only like studies the tattoos, but he also studies the environment from where these patterns are from. Like a lot of them are from plants and animals, and not also just from like the traditions of like the tribes as well. That's how he kind of helped. He would try to get into the mindset of our ancestors, I guess. He did study like psychology in at Long Beach as well. It's like a tribe. I'm not sure if it's called like a tribal psychology, but I don't know what we would call it. But he did study that and use that to help compile these patterns, these and the meanings of them together. But it's all from many resources he's collected, and it's just so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, he would like the way he would describe it to me, because I think he was trying to teach me his process, because now that he's wanting me to revive a lot of or work on reviving tribes in Mindanao, I was like, how are we finding these patterns? Or like, and how do you know what it means? And so I feel like the processes that he has kind of shared with me, how he did it was he reviewed a lot of the patterns that were existing on their clothing, on like pottery, engravings. And so would like collect all of these patterns, and then to try to understand what the patterns mean or the significance and the ancient meanings of it. As Ronna said, he would study the plants that grew there, the animals that were like living in that environment, and then also the tribes and their beliefs and folklore and mythology, and how they may have, what certain plants meant to them or what they used it for, what bugs, like if there's mythology or folklore about certain like bugs or animals, and why those animals were significant to that tribe. So it would be all of these layers, and he would like really study the environment, like what mountain ranges were there, or like did they live by a river, and if they lived by a river, like what were they eating, and to kind of interpret the patterns and the significance of it. So it'd be all of these layers together. So he'll like know, like, I don't know, yeah, he'll like, we'll just like Google images of like certain parts of the Philippines to be like, what mountains there, like what kind of trees are there, and then also having to account like global warming. It's like some of these trees probably don't exist anymore because these tattoos were existing like hundreds of years ago. So what plants were there before, and like how has the landscape changed since? So it's as I said, it's kind of like bits and pieces, and trying to gather as much like different pieces to put it together. Because I mean, even down to like the framework of a tattoo, is significant. He doesn't think anything's random. Like even the Kalinga chest piece, it's like an arch, and he always says like that's like the rice terraces, right? Like there's some kind of significance in everything that was done in the past, or there has to be a reason. So kind of exploring like those questions and seeing if an answer can be arrived at.
So just kind of thinking about the work that Spiritual Journey does and the work that the tribe does, right? In the context of this sort of like larger Reconstructionist movement. It I mean, like with such a movement, right? Like obviously there are going to be like different schools of thought, right? And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, right, about specifically what the tribe is doing in the context of other practitioners, say like Lane Wilkin or um some of the folks that are based out in Hawaii doing that work. We also read a book by like Isla Rhoda. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about sort of like what connects the work that you do with the work that the other practitioners are doing. What are some of the differences in thought that are there?
I think at the start, the root of everyone and like all practitioners nowadays is that there's a curiosity and like a need to connect to the motherland somehow in some regard. And tattoos is one way to access that. So I think that as the seed is where we all begin, which is like a great thing, especially when we're working towards revival, right? There has to be seeds planted. And then how we get to the growth, I think, is where things, yeah, schools of thought may diverge, right? Ronna can speak also what her opinion on this is, but the reason why I sought out spiritual journey, and I've heard other people when they're researching, like, where should I get my tattoos from? Like, what's quote unquote legitimate, or where do I feel called to go? The thing that I felt called to come to spiritual journey was a community of people. Like, it was a team of people doing this. And it wasn't an individual person. And I think the hardest part, or I think the hardest part about being in the diaspora and growing up in the States is like there's like an individualistic mindset of like, oh, like I can pick it up and learn it myself, and then I can tattoo people. But I feel like there's value in coming to a community and a collective of people who are working together to learn these patterns, learn how to tattoo from one another, and to keep sharing knowledge with one another and trying to revive it in this community of people. Because I think anyone who comes to spiritual journey, like, it's very visible. I mean, it literally felt, when the first time I walked into spiritual journey, it felt like my like grandma's house. Like, I was just like, it was just like a living room and you're just like hanging out, and like it felt like family already to me. And I feel like with the tribe, Al always mentions like that you can be the head of something. Like you mentioned, like with like Lane Wilkin. A lot of people is familiar with that name, and I think it's because he has a book out, and it's like written word. And I think written word is something that's very like a Western thing, right? And we're trying to pass things orally, but like there's a legitimacy when there's like written word to something. And so I think his name is more well known. But I always says you can be ahead of someone, ahead of something, and be the thing that people come to for like knowledge, for skills, or to get the piece done, and kind of the point expert of something. But you need arms and legs to spread the word and to spread the knowledge. And like a common motif in the Philippines, and that we often use when we're tattooing, is a centipede. And a centipede often means like many legs and many arms working together as a community towards a common goal. And he thinks that a lot of people in the tattoo space are kind of heads, but the thing that he values and that I value with the tribe is that we're all arms and legs of this bigger thing. And I think that's something that differentiates the tribe from other practitioners, in my opinion, is that there is a tribe, like there's a community there. You want to speak to anything, Ronna? I saw you make like faces when she was listing some of the other practitioners.
No, our tribe we're I guess we're a more communal mindset, which is, I feel,
Yeah. I think one of the things that Elle wants us to always be critical of is, and making sure that we don't do it, is like making really definitive statements about tattoos and the patterns we see, because we're always learning. There's always new information we're finding that contradicts something that we thought before. Where, and I think that's the hesitation that comes with written word, is that once it's written down, people take it as fact. And he's always hesitant about that, because he's like, well, things are always going to be, there's always going to be new information. We're always going to keep learning, and we have to continue to learn from one another and have these discussions, because we can't just arrive at something and think it's factual. Like, there's always going to be more questions. So that is something that I think that's part of the reason why everything's like taught orally, and why he is critical about things that are written out there. And even when he's gathering information, he's always like, well, is this true? But I mean, he's like, I'll keep this as a reference, but I need to find other things that support it. Like, he always talks about, like, this is what I'm guessing this means, but we need to find more information to confirm it. And so I think that is also great. What I love about the tribe and the shop is that, similar to this discussion group, right? You just gather all the information you have, and then you bring it to one another and you just like discuss. Yeah. And then also, one of the things I forgot to mention earlier too, with the patterns and motifs we use in the shop, I think something that's important for people to be aware of is that we pull like ancient patterns, but they're very like simple patterns. And I think something that makes Spiritual Journey very distinct is that we stack patterns. And so we use old patterns, but we make new patterns from these old patterns. And that's also a way to not disrespect these indigenous tribes, because I think it's so easy to like copy and paste. But we want to make sure that we're putting our own like spin on it, because although we say like traditionally formatted pieces, they're actually all still contemporary. They're all modern, right? Because we're using ancient patterns. We know the meanings of that, but when we create stacked patterns and new patterns, it creates new meaning so that it's relevant to us in this modern day. Because a lot of us we may have been born in the Philippines or lived in the Philippines at some point, but a lot of us are in the diaspora. So there is a lens of like, this is a Filipino diasporic lens of this, and it's a way for us to bridge ourselves back to the motherland. But like, there's an understanding that we have to create a new path forward. We're not just like trying to replicate. It's more like inspired by, so that we can move forward in our like identity.
And then I guess I just have one more question. I'll pass things over to April to see if she has any questions she would want to ask you. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the connections that have been built, right? Like between the tribe and some of the indigenous groups in the Philippines, right? Like I know that Elle has traveled a lot, right, in his efforts to gain all of this knowledge. And I was wondering if you might be able to tell us a little bit about sort of the ongoing relationships that your group has with folks back home.
Yes, recently we did go to the Philippines back in February, and we did visit the Kalinga tribe where Wangud is, and they're still good friends. Apparently, like so Elle visited her way before she blew up Wangud, and actually Lars too as well has visited Wangud, and I guess Elle and Lars, both themselves, has helped like this sudden popularity of Filipino tattoos has helped like bring more people to the village itself. It's interesting to see actual people like Filipinos from like Manila go straight to the Kalinga to get a tattoo from her. So in a way, I guess we are also at least helping it like be known that there are our tattoos are still at home, you know. Do you want to add to that, Kristine?
Yeah, I think something that I find like interesting and sometimes have to really like, I don't know, reflect on is that a lot of people in the diaspora are really hungry to reconnect with their roots, and like through tattooing. And it was interesting because I think Al visited Wong back in 2007, I think. And then that article with Wong came out a year ago, a couple years ago. And I just feel like there was, even my cousin who lives in the Philippines is like, people outside the Philippines are way more interested in digging in on like what is Filipino than like her and her friends who are grew up in the Philippines. And sometimes I feel like as part of the diaspora, something we get to do is kind of shine light on like how awesome the Philippines is, like what amazing things are happening in the Philippines, what the tribes there did before colonization, and to show like what, I don't know, just like how beautiful and diverse the tribes in the Philippines are without seeking validation from like the West. And I feel like that was the irony with Wong being featured in Vogue, because Wong was always there and she was always tattooing for like years. And it wasn't until she was featured on Vogue that a lot of people started like going to Buscalan and wanting these tattoos or more interested in Filipino tribal. And it's kind of like a double-edged sword because yeah, that, I mean, it helps, and at least we're shedding light on it now. And I think moving forward, one of the things we want to do is continue to build relationships with Indigenous communities in the Philippines and empower these communities to revive their own traditional practices. So my husband recently met someone from, I don't know if you guys saw the Vogue feature, like Mindanao is like blowing up. I feel like a lot of their weaving practices and everything's blowing up. And some of them actually visited California. And my husband was able to go to one of those, I think it was a workshop. It was kind of like a talk. And he met someone from the Taboli tribe. And she was like, he was asking her, are there still tattooists, like where you're from? And she said, most of them already, like all of them have already passed away, but there are elders who still have tattoos. And so one of the priorities for me is to get to the Philippines and to meet the people who are tattooed, to get their stories, and to hear about their experiences with it, so that we can continue to revive their practices. And then hopefully if like showing my tattoos, like I didn't like that there is a resurgence there to seek out more, or like, I don't know, for people to want to tattoo again there, because that something like this can easily disappear within a generation. So if the elders are tattooed and if they pass away, and then what? So it's like, it kind of feels like a priority just to get there and to like ask questions now and to document and to build those relationships, and to empower hopefully people like the communities there to be like, hey, this is important. And I want you to know how important and like how cool I think it is for you guys to continue. And if that's something that like I can be a part of, then I just want to, I don't know, build these relationships further in the way that Elle was able to, like in Kalinga, in Buscalan. And yeah, because the Philippines is so massive and there's just like hundreds of tribes. So just kind of hoping to move it like a dial forward.
April, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
You both answered almost all of my questions during the last 45 minutes. I was just like marking them off on my piece of paper. I guess one of the questions I do have. What has you talked a little bit about this in terms of like finding community through the tribe. What has the general reaction been from the Filipino community where you all are at in terms of seeing you with your tattoos? Because it's like not as, I know like is there reviving tattooing? So how is like, have you had any interactions with like elders who might not have tattooing, and like has it been like negative interactions or mostly positive interactions with the community?
Well, for me, when I went to Buscalan and met Wangod, it was all very positive. Wangud's brothers and even like the community, they loved our tattoos when we were over there. But most of the negativity that we get is mostly online. People who think they're like, one recently was like, oh, like, why do you call it revival? Like, they don't need to revive, and then we'll just reply like, well, you're welcome. Like, yeah.
Yeah, that was a comment. Yeah, like it was like, yeah, why is there a revival? Like, there's always been tattoos. There's never like a disconnect. But I was like, no, they've been working at it for the last 28 years. That's why it seems like it's been streamlined. But there was like a significant gap in it. I was laughing because the negative reaction is from my parents and my parents' generation. Like I was like, look, this is like I am trying to connect back to the Philippines, and it feels very meaningful to me. But my parents have not even asked about my test. Like they were shocked, and they at to this day, I mean, it's only been a year, but they still have never asked like, what do these mean? Like, what is it inspired by? They've never asked anything about it. So I think that's the gap too, and like why it's a revival, because there are generations between like our generation and then like my parents and maybe their parents, so my grandparents, who still see it as like taboo, right?
Yeah, like I said, you guys were great. You answered like multiple of my questions already. I was like, oh, but we do have only 15 minutes left. So we do have a couple questions that we got ahead of time. And I see Kevin has a question in the chat. So I'll ask you the question that we got ahead of time. And this one was actually from Nazarene, who was part of our cohort and is in this chat right now. But she was asking, what do you say to diasporic Filipinos who are aiming for connection through their tattoos?
I literally just hear Elle's voice in my head where he's just like, do it, get a tattoo. And he's always like, do your face. he's, he's very much just like, jump in. Like, I think the funny thing about tattoos and like cultural tattoos is like, I think there's a lot of pondering and like research with it, right? It's like, what do these mean? What do I like? Yeah. And the beauty about spiritual journey, the tribe, is like the research has been done, and the things that we invite people to do is just exploring your own ancestry. Like, where's your family from? What did your great great grandparents do? And it kind of also the self reflection of like, what are you really? Why do you feel called to get tattoos now? Kind of thing. And the beauty of the tribe is like we've done all of this research so that you just kind of share, like verbal, like just orally share what you went through or what you're interested in or your ancestry. And like I think when people get tattoos, there's definitely a surrender that happens because people don't see what they get tattooed. We don't do any pre-designs. We just do a loose chart of patterns. And we don't even show the chart of patterns until the day of the appointment. So there's a surrender that happens. You just show up and you're like, I don't know what I'm getting tattooed. Like you might know the area you're getting tattooed, but you don't know what the patterns look like. You don't know what they mean. You just like sit in the chair. So I feel like there is a lot of reflection that happens, but there's, yeah, a degree of surrender. And so I think when Elle's just like, do it, just do it. It's because there's a trust that happens and you just kind of like jump forward. You're just like, okay, like there is something happening that's, you're being called to like get tattooed. And I feel like it can just be as simple as that. Get tattooed.
Ooh. And then another question we had, you both touched a little bit on this, but can you talk about your experience on connecting with your heritage and choosing your own traditional tattooing? I know Kristine talked about when you went back to the Philippines, you were inspired by that, and when you came back, you were interested. Ronna, if you can talk a little bit about your experience too when it came to like choosing your tattoo, if you're open to sharing. If it's deeply personal, then of course not.
Well, for me, it's because I've always liked tattoos. Like before I knew about Filipino tattoos, I was just researching. And when I found out through my siblings, like, oh yeah, Filipinos have tattoos, I'm like, what? Like, I was just so shocked. I'm like, because like whatever is out here in America when it comes to tattoos, it's all these like old school traditional black and gray stuff. It just never felt right for me to get them. And when I found out like about Filipino tattoos, I did as much research as I could. I got Lars' book. Thank God I read that first. I would have been probably somewhere else, but um yeah, just learning that we had these tattoos our own, like from our own homeland, it's just felt right for me to get that. It would just felt more, I guess, home. I don't know, like that's how I felt when I was researching these. And then when I at the end of Lars's book, there's actually like the shop listed at the back. And when I saw like, oh my God, like they're just like down the street. I might as well like call them and see how this works. And that's how it started for me. Yeah.
Kristine, do you want to add on anything about your journey and your own?
Yeah. That's so, I don't know. Wow, I got like a little, when Rona said it felt like home, I was like, I feel like I felt that too. Um, Especially when I mean, I'm kind of an impulsive person, so I think I just showed up and just like, I can't say like anything made sense. I didn't feel like, oh, this is it. Like when I came to the shop, I was just like, I just want to ask a question, and I was fully preparing myself for them to be like, you're like not an artist though. I did not have an artist background. Let's just say that. When I saw Rona's portfolio, I was like, oh my God, no wonder Elle laughed at me. It was like a warm laugh. It was like a nice laugh, but I always joke I'm like the personality hire. But like I felt like, I don't know, like I can't say I can narrow down what brought me there. Except for like curiosity and interest and just kind of being like, okay, sure, like yes. And it wasn't until I got tattooed, like did my full piece, got my full piece tattooed, where I felt more like, yeah, I felt at home in my skin. Yeah, I don't know. I can't narrow anything down. I think I just every day I'm just like, what is this? How is this my life? Or how did I get here? Like, I don't know. So I can't really narrow it down. I think I just followed curiosity and took the opportunities that were laid before me.
Mhm. Bryn, this question is kind of towards you too, because you just got your first one. Also, do you feel similar in a way that it feels like home?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely sort of just like, yeah, like a sense of familiarity with my own skin. And I think like in some ways this is applied to a lot of my tattoos, but this one, I mean, is obviously very different, right? Like it has a lot of cultural significance to me, right? Like it speaks specifically to my family, my community, the things that we've collectively accomplished. And so, yeah, I feel like there's just like a different, like an added layer of pride. Um, sort of behind this one, I think.
It looks like we have one question in the chat, and it is, in your own personal practices, how do you navigate the dilemma of preservation and adding your own creative interpretations?
Hmm.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think of.
Yeah, so in your own personal practices, how do you navigate the dilemma of preservation and adding your own creative interpretations?
So for me, it's more so in preserving these tattoos. These are all I would say contemporary or modern tattoos. So in keeping the same meaning of it with the tattoo, I feel like that helps preserve it in a way, like, but also that adding that modern meaning to it helps preserve it. It helps keep it going through our time. Like back in the days, we didn't have like electricity or pilots. You know, like our ancestors, they didn't live with what we have today. So we have to take a lot of these old patterns and try and do our best to apply them to our like standards today. Like for example, like when we try to think of a pattern for someone who's a pilot, um, we would take like a pattern for like a storm, like a thunderstorm electricity and mix it with like a bird. So it's kind of like, oh, it's like he's a pilot, so he drives this electric bird. You know, like in a way, it's a very interesting like way to interpret these. We do our best to modernize these tattoos to keep them going, uh, and as adding our own flair to it. It's like in a way, it just evolves with the artist. Like for example, Zell, she's been doing this way longer than any of us, and she has her like you can tell like nowadays like oh yeah Zell did this tattoo and she has this specific it's just so clean and she has this style like she adds to like add this interesting curling boxy techniques to her like her patterns. It's kind of hard to describe, but if you see her tattoos a lot, there's a unique touch to it that screams Zell. I know it's hard to imagine. I don't know how else I can describe it really.
Yeah, I think yeah, to go off that, yeah, it's like we use the simple like patterns that a lot of people are familiar with. Like people are familiar with like the honeycombs or like weaving patterns, and things like that. Or things like rivers, like a zigzag is a river, but like we like stack patterns to make a new meaning for it. And then as researchers, like me and Ronna are learning how to do the research for these chart of patterns. And essentially it's pulling patterns and it's like understanding how to break up the patterns, like which one's like a bird and what kind of bird is it? Or like, which one's a river, which one's a path, which one's like an ancestor. And then have it stacked together and like reinterpret it for the individual so that we can connect their story to these patterns. So like that's kind of our job as the researcher. And then for styles, yeah, when I first started the shop, I was asking Ronna, I was like, I don't understand how you can tell the difference between all the artists because it's like the same pattern. It'll be the same pattern. And I'm like, how can you tell? Like who's who? But after, I guess it's just kind of developing an eye for it and like looking really closely. It's like even out in the world, like I can tell when someone got their tattoo done at Spiritual Journey. And then at that, I could tell what artist did it because while it could be like the same pattern, they do have, it's just like little things that make it their work. And that is something that I feel like I am currently struggling with as an apprentice is like, I'm very familiar with the way they've stylized it. And so how am I going to put my own spin on it and like not copy? And so that is like something that I feel like as an apprentice, one of the things that I am like working on is developing my own like signature of like how I tattoo while still using the same patterns, right? Because it's just like something I think to artists can kind of see it right away, and then to an outsider perspective, it's just like, well, I don't know the difference. So sometimes I feel like it's like minor, and like you can tell like Joseph has just they all have distinct styles. Joseph, Elle, Jazz, and Nate and Zell are all very, I don't know, you can just tell after a while. Yeah.
So we only have a couple of minutes left. But I was wondering if you might be able to show us, right, like the visual examples that you had prepared and maybe tell us a little bit about like what distinguishes, right, like each tattoo and its cultural significance from, right, like the others.
Yeah. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay. So this, you guys can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Ronna, Ronna's piece. Do you want to go real quick, Ronna, how like where yours is, the framework is from, and how it's kind of modernized or different?
Oh, so my tattoos are Kalinga inspired. What makes it different is pretty much the black bars that are throughout the tattoo. If you look at like the traditional Kalinga tattoos, like it's all just straight lines. What makes it different is obviously like we fill in those lines, the framework. And the thing is that the format is very different still on the arms. Like usually, so if you see those like there are horizontal bars that go across my arms. In the original like Kalinga tattoos, those bars actually go all the way straight down down the arm. I guess that like what changes it too is like a lot of like the patterns, just to add a lot of patterns to what I have, they're framed, like they all have different frames for these patterns. Yeah, I guess like that's also like the shop's signature look too, is these black bars throughout the tattoo that helps make it more bold than and just helps it also like in a way doesn't exactly copy like our ancestors, so it's still in a way modern.
Yeah, it's very distinct. Like you can see these pieces from like a mile away.
Mhm.
So my piece is inspired by the Agusan Manobo tribe, which is really different from Rona's, because a lot of my patterns are floating patterns. So there's no like dark bars. So it's just very different from hers. And this is what we're working to revive. That I know of, I'm like the second woman to have this in the diaspora. The first one was our tribe sister Debbie, but she's got her like upper arms done. So I had the privilege of having like the full piece, and then my front and my back done. So this is the tribe from Mindanao. I also wanted to show Joseph's piece because he was actually the first Bontoc piece that we're also trying to revive. He's always like, oh, I need to find more people from the Bontoc region. If you see his too, his actually is also floating, but there are distinct bars, and his chest piece is kind of like the Kalinga men chest piece that you'll see, the arch. And then he's actually gotten his arms done recently. This is a pretty old photo, but he also has his arms done. And then I think I just wanted to share some images from pieces that we're currently reviving because, as you said, a lot of people are familiar with the Kalinga and style of tattoos. And also now I think the science, like the pintados, a lot of people are familiar with that. So I was like really wanting to revive a lot beyond that, right? So these are old photos of pieces. This is the Pantoran tribe from Mindanao. They used to tattoo their stomachs. I think, Bryn, you might have been there when I was tattooing her, Lorraine. So I just about finished her piece, but we were able to tattoo her stomach. So those first photos were the inspiration. But again, we kind of modernized it and we kind of told her story in her tattoo. as well, so it wasn't just lines, but definitely the framework inspired by the Bantaran Manobo tribe. And then something that Elle's working on, he's actually testing my husband right now. This is the what I suit from the Visayan area, which is very different from the Pintados piece. Elle's been like gathering a lot of information on this area, this tribe, like what the tattoos are, what they might mean. But he started tattooing Paul, so you can see the framework is like all the vertical stripes. The patterns have not all been filled in, but definitely inspired by that first photo. Let's see. And then started the back of the leg. So this is still in progress, but one of the projects Ella's been working on. And then Ronna is working on from South Cotabato, right?
Yes.
South Cotabato tribe, where they had their legs and their forearms done. Also floating patterns, so which kind of makes sense because also from Mindanao. And so this was all hand poked by Ronna. So this is the front of the leg, and then the back piece. I don't think we have photos of it, but the back piece is circular pieces, which makes it very distinctly South Cotabato and different from my like Agusan Manobo tribe, which is all diamonds. So that's like a way to distinguish those two. But Rona's actually also tattooing his forearm, all hand poke as well. And then for Lorraine's stomach piece, I'm gonna tattoo her forearms as well soon. So that there's like a full, yeah, it's very exciting because it's like even just seeing these tattoos and like even with like me, Ronna, and Joseph's tattoos, like all very distinct. And it just shows kind of how diverse the Philippines is, right? Like we're all from Philippines, but all the tattoos look so different from one another. So that's just some of the stuff that we've been working on at the shop, and just trying to keep the revival alive and going.
How long did that hand poke piece take?
The one I did, or
Yeah,
which one?
sorry, the one you did, the leg piece.
Oh, so I think that took like over like probably I think 11 days he came in. Yeah. He's very patient.
He loves being at the shop.
Yeah, he really likes being home. Like he's a very that person that is actually my cousin. He's his dad's actually Ilocano and his mom's from Mindanao, and like that's why he's able to get this Mindanao piece. And in his patterns too, there's some Ilocano like patterns in there as well, just to bring homage to that side of his family. But yeah, like he's just a really busy person and prefers to go to the shop for a break like every once in a while. So that's how he got. But it took him 11 days for that just piece.
Amazing. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. You all, the two of you have already shared so much with us. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much for meeting with us today. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, it's been good to see you both.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was
Yes.
nice to like, be in a space like this.
April, did you have anything else to add before we sign off?
No, yeah, thank you both again for taking time out of your day, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.